This is the 29th broadcast in the America Looks Abroad series, presented by the officers and staff members of the Foreign Policy Association. This nonpartisan organization, open to all who are interested in American foreign policy, offers accurate information on current world events. In the world of today, foreign affairs are your affairs. Today, with the German army only 22 miles from the coast of England, a new phase in the war is about to begin. Mr. James Frederick Green, Research Associate of the Foreign Policy Association, will therefore discuss Great Britain Prepares for Invasion. Mr. Green.
Good afternoon. During this past week, we have been watching one of the greatest battles, and therefore one of the most horrible battles in all human history. Military experts agree that never have so many men and so much material been hurled so recklessly across the battlefield. None of us, except perhaps veterans of the World War, can really picture what is meant by the phrases that appear day after day in our newspapers. Phrases like curtain of fire, rain of bombs, and men mowed down like grass. This is the real war that we have been talking about and reading about for the past 20 years. The war of dive bombers and monster tanks, of flamethrowers and incendiary bombs, of everything except poison gas. We shouldn't be surprised that this real war has come. We should only be surprised that it didn't come sooner. Those first few months of quiet stalemate, from early September to early April, were really merely months of preparation, merely the first phase of the war. That first phase came to an end on April 9th, when Germany pushed northward into Scandinavia. The second phase of the war has been in progress during April and May, and is now coming to a close. During that second phase, the German forces invaded Denmark, Norway, Holland, Belgium, and northern France in order to get a foothold for the real struggle. Germany has thus eliminated, with the exception of Switzerland, all of the buffer states, the border neutrals, which stood between Germany and the Allies. And now the third phase of the war is beginning, for Germany is preparing to strike directly at London and Paris. No one can safely predict what course this third phase will take. Germany must first consolidate its position along the Channel and reinforce its troops and supply lines. It looks now as if Germany may strike first at France, perhaps with the aid of Italy. The Germans would hardly dare launch their attack against Britain while the French forces remained intact along their southern flank. General Weygand appears to be digging in along the Somme and Aisne rivers and be getting fresh troops from Britain to augment the Allied army. Yesterday, Germany attacked fiercely all along this line, especially between Amiens and Abbeville, while German planes bombed towns along the Rhone Valley, clear to Marseille. And today the Italians appeared almost ready to enter the war and to strike at France from the south. But Germany's real objective is London. The Nazis have made it perfectly clear that they intend to destroy British sea power once and for all, and to smash the British Empire. The Nazis now say that they can invade England and capture London within a few weeks. They will probably try to weaken Britain first, by airplane and submarine attacks, while they are dealing with France. Then will come, perhaps in the next month or so, Germany's grand assault against the British Isles. Well, how do the Nazis propose to cross the Channel and defeat the British, assuming for the moment that they can hold their present position and checkmate or conquer France? According to all reports, the Germans are preparing to use against the British Isles all the many different but carefully coordinated weapons which they have tried out so successfully in Poland, Norway, the Low Countries. Speed, surprise, and terrorism are the basic elements of the German attack, and they are carried out by overwhelming air power, mechanized troops, submarines, and small boats. Germany is already in control of the Channel ports, and therefore can mount heavy artillery to use against both shipping in the Channel and the English coast itself. Two English ports, Dover and Folkestone, are less than 25 miles away, or within the range of German artillery. Germany, furthermore, now has naval and air bases in Norway, Denmark, Holland, and Belgium, facing the entire east coast of Scotland and England. Germany's submarines, which have been ominously quiet during the past few weeks, have already started a new campaign against both merchant and naval vessels. Germany is also expected to use small but powerful motorboats, carrying about 200 men apiece, to transport fully equipped troops to Britain's coasts, many points of which are sparsely populated and undefended. At the same time, presumably, the Nazis will send bombers and parachute troops over the entire British Isles, which after all are smaller than either Poland or Norway. Well, 10 years ago, such an attack upon the British Isles would have seemed utterly fantastic. Since 1066, no foreign power has invaded and conquered Britain. But today it is possible, though very difficult, for a foreign power to defeat the British on their own soil. If the Nazis should succeed in defeating both Britain and France this summer, they would certainly demand immediate surrender of the British Navy and of many British colonies. Miss Dorothy Thompson, in her syndicated column last Friday, suggested that the Nazis would use the medieval system of hostages, a system which has served them so well in dealing with the Jews. The Nazis would simply say to the entire British Empire, either surrender and give us the Navy, or else. And the or else in this case would be the starving and bombing of the British people. Now obviously, the British aren't going to submit to invasion without very strong resistance, perhaps successful resistance. Their government, under Winston Churchill, is rushing defense preparations along several fronts. On the military front, the government has placed over 1 million men under arms in Great Britain, and it has already organized civilian groups to combat German parachute troops. It has rounded up guns and ammunition from sports shops and hunted for spies among the docks, railway yards, and warehouses. The British government, of course, has taken special precautions along the East Coast and evacuated children from the East Coast towns. On the economic front, too, Great Britain is preparing for real warfare. About 10 days ago, the British Parliament, in less than 3 hours, gave complete dictatorial powers to the Churchill government. Mr. Churchill and his coalition cabinet now have power to control all persons and property in the United Kingdom, to conscript labor and regulate conditions of employment, to control banks and finance, and to impose an excess profits tax of 100%. And the government has already begun to use these tremendous powers. The tragedy is not so much that Britain had to adopt a totalitarian economy to fight the Nazis on their own terms, but that it did so 9 months after the war began. Under Neville Chamberlain, the government never recognized the urgency of the situation, and it never demanded these gigantic but necessary sacrifices. The propertied interests in Britain, on the one hand, opposed any mobilization of industry and curtailment of profits, and labor, on the other, resisted any efforts to weaken its position. Not until the enemy was at the door did Britain achieve real national unity. The Churchill government went to work on the political front also. The British have profited from the experience of Scandinavia and the Low Countries. Parliament imposed the death penalty for serious cases of espionage and sabotage. The London police raided Britain's leading fascist organization called the British Union and arrested its leader, Sir Oswald Mosley. The police also arrested a Conservative member of Parliament, Captain Ramsay, another fascist noted for anti-Semitism. And incidentally, Canada has followed suit and closed in on its fascist party, headed by Adrian Arcand. These fascist groups had made little headway in either Britain or Canada in peacetime, but they were obviously a menace in wartime. Their suppression was long overdue. But for Britain, the greatest danger of Fifth Column activity arises across the Irish Sea. Britain expects Germany to attack from the west as well as from the east, and it is therefore greatly alarmed over conditions in Erra. The Irish Republican Army is continuing to foment trouble in Erra, and is generally believed to receive Nazi funds for its terrorism. The Erra government, under Premier de Valera, has placed its army on a wartime footing and called up all available reserves. But since Erra is neutral, there is still a German legation in Dublin, and many German tourists and journalists are said to be entering the city. Britain is especially afraid that Erra may become a German naval and air base, because 2 years ago, Britain transferred its 3 naval bases in southern Ireland to the De Valera government and withdrew all remaining British troops from Erra. In the next few months, then, or even in the next few weeks, we may see this frightful Holocaust spread across the Channel into the British Isles. For the first time in 300 years, since the Cromwell Revolution in the 17th century, there may be fighting in the heart of England itself. No one dares to predict the outcome of such a combat, if and when it comes. No matter who wins, the destruction of London would create confusion and havoc beyond description. London is the center of a vast empire and of a world economic network. To smash London would be like smashing the mainspring of a delicate watch. Even if Britain wins, Europe will never look the same again, for this war is already washing away what was left of 19th century civilization after the World War. If Britain loses, it can expect to become an island without an empire, or perhaps a province of Nazi Germany, just as it was once a province of the Roman Empire. This is indeed a turning point in history. We use that phrase so frequently that it is almost hackneyed. But certainly the present battle in Flanders and the coming struggle in France and Britain do constitute a real turning point in history. This struggle may settle the fate of Europe for years to come. It obviously affects the lives of all of us in North America, in Canada, and in the United States. First, a word about the Dominion of Canada. The Canadians, quite naturally, view the present retreat of the Allies with the greatest anxiety. Canada went to war on its own responsibility on September 10th and began large-scale military and economic preparations. But Canada, like Britain and France, was expecting a long, slow war, not the blitzkrieg that has descended upon Europe. Canada and the other British dominions as well cannot now exert sufficient force to have any effect upon the battle in progress. They can only hope for some miracle which will slow down the German drive on Paris and London, and that will give the British Commonwealth time to organize its full effort. The Canadians realize full well the consequences of a Nazi victory over Britain and the Empire. They realize, too, that the surrender of the British Navy would leave Canada completely dependent upon the United States for defense, and that Nazi control of the British economy would likewise leave Canada dependent upon America. For the United States, too, the war in general, and Canada's position in particular, raised some vital issues. Already, in our effort to defend the Monroe Doctrine and unite the Western Hemisphere, we are sending a cruiser to South America, where Nazi penetration is having its effect. Already the President has raised his request for defense funds to almost $5 billion. In reformulating our foreign policy and our defense program, we at least have the examples of Britain and France before us, and we can profit from their mistakes. In the first place, we have learned not to underestimate the strength of the Nazi regime. We realize that a revolution is sweeping across Europe, armed with the mightiest weapons known in history. Whatever the outcome, the political structure and economic system of Europe will be altered beyond recognition. In the second place, we have learned from the British that you cannot quickly produce modern armaments by old-fashioned methods, and that you cannot compete with the Nazi economy without sacrificing some of your own democratic freedom. A modern defense program requires sacrifices from every part of the population, and the curtailment of many of the luxuries and some of the necessities of civilian life. And finally, we have learned from the tragic events of the past few weeks that democracy, if it is to win, must take the initiative, use the imagination, create the efficiency, and find the courage which have characterized the dictatorships. Here in the Western Hemisphere, we have to revive the heroic qualities which went into the building of the New World. We have to reforge those great qualities into new weapons, spiritual as well as material, new weapons for achieving national unity in America and for achieving international solidarity among the American republics.
Mr. James Frederick Green, Research Associate of the Foreign Policy Association and author of The British Empire Under Fire, was today's speaker in the America Looks Abroad series. If you would like a free copy of this talk, send your request to the Foreign Policy Association, number 8 West 40th Street, New York. This is the National Broadcasting Company.